Sean O'Keefe, former Navy Secretary, NASA Administrator, and senior leader across multiple presidential administrations, reflects on the principles that shaped his long federal career. In this episode of Lessons in Leadership, he joined Shane Canfield, CEO of WAEPA, to discuss motivating teams through uncertainty, leading across agencies, and staying rooted in mission during times of public scrutiny and change.
Hello, and welcome to the Lessons in Leadership podcast. I'm your host, Shane Canfield, CEO of WAEPA. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Sean O'Keefe, former NASA Administrator, former Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget, former Secretary of the Navy, former Comptroller and CFO of the Defense Department, and Professor Emeritus at Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Public Affairs. Welcome, and thank you for joining.
Well, thank you, Shane. Delight to be with you. Appreciate it very much.
What first drew you into public service, and when was it evident to you that leadership was an important part of the roles you played?
Well, I grew up around the public service. My dad was a career naval officer. He was a submariner, and we lived all over the place throughout the country. And as a result, I got an up-close and personal understanding through him, as well as through all the folks he associated with and the environments he was working in, just what the extraordinary value is of public service and what is it that would motivate people to want to be engaged in it and to be really involving themselves in what is something larger than themselves. And as a consequence of that, going through school, college, and ultimately graduate school, my focus was on the implementation of public policy. How do you go about doing that? Because that's every bit as important, some would argue even more so, than the development of a public policy to begin with. And the only place that is really formulated properly is within the public sector and the public service. That again is the beneficiary or the beneficiaries are the citizens of the nation, the community, and the region in which you live.
Did you find yourself thinking about leadership, or is this something that came naturally to you as a result of your positions? Did you think about leadership early on, saying, I need to be a great leader, and therefore I'm going to learn how to do it, or did you just naturally evolve into it? Any thoughts on that?
I guess it evolved by the great good fortune of being witness to several really extraordinary leaders, people who really did take the initiative to engage others in the task, to pull together and motivate folks to really contribute their very best to achieve an outcome. And I saw the value of that on multiple occasions in several different circumstances, again, beginning from the time that I was a kid and moving forward all the way through a career in public service that really did demonstrate the tremendous value and necessity of mobilizing people. I mean, because you manage things and you lead people. And the means by which that's accomplished is to lead them, is to motivate them to understand what the objective is, to establish clarity of exactly what the point of the exercise is all about, what the larger goal is that's trying to be achieved, and having everybody feel like they're part of that solution. What can I do to contribute to that outcome from what I do? And I saw that demonstrated in multiple cases in every circumstance involved, and found that was the primary ingredient, the trait, the characteristic that needed to be exhibited is the fundamentals of leadership in moving everyone engaged towards a common objective.
We had Admiral Cutler Dawson. You may have run across him.
Yes, I have.
Yeah, and he was the very first podcast guest we had. And I remember him talking about it. At a certain point, he came to he didn't say it exactly like you did, but the sentiment was the same. You're managing things, but you're leading and engaging with people. And that puts people really at the crux of success, does it?
Sure it is, no doubt about it. It's There is no organization I've ever been part of that had no people in it.
Yeah.
It's an essential talent is the essential ingredient that every organization looks for in order to achieve what its mission is all about. And if you can't lead everybody to that particular conclusion that is enunciated or stipulated as being the strategic objective, this is everybody's basically just going through the motions.
You have served under several presidents. Can you talk a little bit about that? What were there challenges to overcome, or were you away from politics so you didn't get? Talk about that a little bit. How does it differ as you serve through a transition, or does leadership stay the same?
Oh no, it's it's really critically important in transition cases, to be sure. But the two presidents that I served in their administrations were President George H.W. Bush and President George W. Bush in two different eras, obviously. But as a consequence, that was the closest I came to understanding the nature of the individuals who were in that ultimate leadership capacity, and their capability to motivate. Both of them were just extraordinarily inspiring people who motivated everybody to be part of the solution. But most importantly, they also had a capacity of really designating what needed to be done. And you knew that they were perfectly prepared to do it themselves. And that made the task that much more achievable, because you knew that if they're willing to do this and willing to focus on this objective, you certainly ought to put your best to it in order to achieve that outcome. And unbelievably inspiring people who I was privileged to have worked for directly. In other circumstances, though, certainly in other areas, worked for several years on Capitol Hill in the Senate and on the appropriations staff, and worked for the chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Ted Stevens from Alaska. There's a guy who was an incredible motivator, who really did inspire loyalty to the objective and understanding that this was all about not him, but the goal that we had in mind. And I just had the great good fortune of learning from extraordinary people like him and George H.W. as well as George W. Bush in working through those capacities. Dick Cheney, who was the Secretary of Defense when I was in the Pentagon during my first extended terms of presidential appointment, and then later in the capacity as vice president when I was the NASA administrator and working on the White House staff previous to that as deputy director at OMB, was a major factor and a major mentor in really designing the methodology we're going to use to go implement the policy, and being an inspiration to get there, and a mentor to me to help achieve those goals. So there were several different circumstances in understanding what the objectives of the senior leadership are all about, and in many cases working in several capacities much earlier, before ever going to the Appropriations Committee. One of the career public servants who was a senior executive service member himself was Welch Hardman, who was the guy who first took the risk on bringing in a guy like me, who really didn't have a whole lot to offer because I had no experience at it, but he could recognize what it was the potential could be and knew how to help develop that. So having, the folks of all varieties, of all backgrounds, that can motivate those conditions is larger than many other factors that would ever be involved.
You've worked for different kinds of organizations, political administrations, and then government departments, agencies, and then private sector, and now academia. How does that affect your leadership style? Or do you find that leadership, the core tenets of leadership, are applicable no matter what the organization you find yourself in and having to lead? It doesn't matter where you are, that the core leadership characteristics are the same? Are they different? Are you adapting?
Well, there's a common myth in my judgment, and I'm probably the minority view of this in the academic field of public management. That common myth is that you can't apply the same principles in the public sector that you do in the private sector.
Yeah.
I never found that to be an impediment.
Okay.
It was always a circumstance where, strategy, the focus on the talent, people engaged, the process to going through decision making, the integrity imperative that must be there in order to demonstrate the absolute conviction of what's intended here, as well as the moral standing of what it is you're attempting to achieve. All those factors are very much the same. And it is, they're common conditions. Every organization loves to believe that it's unique. There's no doubt about that. And usually that's a measure of culture within an organization, is the depth of pride in the organization, of its history as well as its practices and so forth, that really describe the culture of the organization in big ways. But it's those same variables that are existent in public sector, private sector, nonprofits. All the means by which you go about any one of those is different. It's going to have its nuances, and there are very distinctive, differentiators within those organizations and those sectors. But at the same time, those basic principles, those tenets, foundations of what make up organizations and organization theory, in so many ways are fundamentally the same. And how you employ those may be slightly nuanced to match the condition, but they all are imperative in the same direction.
A little bit of a different direction. You were part of the very first cohort of what is now Presidential Management Intern Program, later became the Presidential Management Fellows Program. What did that early experience teach you about leading within government?
Two things. First one was, again, as a consequence of the mentorship of Welch Hardman, the career SES that I mentioned, who was pretty much the mentor for the program that was, as it first started in 1978, and I was in the first cohort of a program that nobody knew anything about. He had a vision of how that could work to develop financial managers within the organization that he was leading. And as a result, gave me an exposure throughout the course of that 2-year program that ultimately, in various departments, agencies, functions, that all touched on how that process worked within the federal establishment. That was the equivalency, I came to realize later, of a decade worth of experience and understanding and visibility of how the process actually moved through various cases, sometimes well and sometimes not. But you got the clear understanding of where those touchstones were throughout the course of moving an entire process going forward. That is the business of what we're engaged in today's debate about shutdowns and everything else, is the failure of that process. Why did that come about, and how is it involved? Fortunately, I never had to live through one of those situations in my formative years, but it was one that clearly demonstrated why this was such an important set of functions required to get the process right. And that made a big difference, and it accelerated the pace of the professional development, which is what the program was all about. The Presidential Management Intern Program, as it started, was designed for just that purpose, a focus on public management, a focus on implementation. And its evolution over time has been extraordinary. It mystifies me why that has been the subject now of an executive order that has dismantled it. And it's absolutely unconscionable given the nature of the hundreds, thousands of people who moved through that program in the course of the last nearly 50 years that have gone on in some cases to be senior executives within the federal government, and in other cases they've moved on to other kinds of pursuits. But even with that, even for those who have left the service, they walked away with an appreciation of what public service is all about, why it matters, and why this is so critical to get it right. Because by and large, the reason why these functions are delegated to the public sector is because no one else can do it. Usually that's the case. It takes that kind of focus of a public entity in order to achieve an outcome that frankly would not be achieved in other spheres. So as a result of that, it gave me an incredibly in-depth understanding of that process at a very early stage in my career that has lasted the entirety of that professional experience. And I valued it all the way through, stayed associated with the program, and very much sought to try to continue to advance it to, unfortunately, a condition today where it requires a resurrection.
Previous generation, I know my father's generation for sure, was very deeply moved by John F. Kennedy and the that's not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. He was moved by that. I was in elementary school, but I knew there was a difference in him when he first started serving in federal government. How do we keep that alive? How do we keep that spirit alive? Because federal government employees really do have a tough time in a way that just didn't exist a generation or two ago.
In my mind, it has become a political, whipping post over the course of the last, 30 odd years with most presidents who have at some point, and politicians generally in the Senate and the House, and governors, it doesn't matter what the public position is. It is fashionable to run against the bureaucracy. And as a consequence, blaming the ills on that system is the wrong objective in my mind. And what Kennedy did in so many ways was spoke to the value of what it takes to develop capabilities, to go do things that wouldn't otherwise be accomplished, that are imperative for a community to thrive, expand, evolve, and continue to prosper. And his motivation in that particular case has sustained over the course of this time. It's just battered at this point. There was a fascinating discovery, I guess, in the course of research that I went through, that as a United States senator, as a junior senator from Massachusetts, John F. Kennedy came to Syracuse University and delivered a speech in 1957, in a commencement speech that was the foundational piece, the early framework of his commitment to how to articulate public service and the value of citizenship engagement, all the features that go with that. It is an incredibly inspiring, albeit early, raw version of the refinement that he put to it by the time he was president. That is just incredible. And I've used it in several different classes and so forth, just to articulate, here's what has been a sustained kind of view. And you can see exact striking parallels to today in reading through this and seeing the nature of the challenges, the issues that are confronted, and why it's imperative for public service to be engaged and for citizens to feel like they're part of it. That's what we lost the disconnect with. And that's why the political discourse, in my mind, has been distorted to make this more a running against Washington argument, which is ill-placed in so many different ways. It's more, how do you reinvigorate that capability in order to have the capability that we have throughout the federal government work on behalf of all citizens. That's the goal. And in so many ways, it's much of what he laid out as an articulated position that has sustained and last. It's just tortured at this point. I mean, really tortured to a point we haven't seen in decades. But it nonetheless is something that I think will be the framework that ultimately motivates a revival. It's going to occur. It's a question of when.
That's excellent. I love the thread of optimism that these concepts, that this feeling of public service is an enduring one. I think I'm hearing you say that. That sounds wonderful. For federal employees in their first management role, what guidance would you give them?
Oh, it's the same one I offer to graduate students who come to my door and say, what should I be doing in order to really have a public service experience, anything approximating like what you've done? And the answer is real simple. Be handy. Do things in the earliest stage of your career and throughout that many other folks were not interested in stepping up to. Because regardless of how it comes out, no matter how, the consequences of that particular case come to be, nonetheless, what you get is a tremendous amount of experience and a lot of support for someone who's willing to step in when many others would just soon keep an arm's length distant from it. And it sometimes can, end in a position where you didn't achieve the outcome. Often that will be a case. But nonetheless, the fact you tried gives you a tremendous education and in turn provides an opportunity to look at a problem differently from the perspective of somebody who's not encumbered by any of the past experiences of this. In my earliest stages of the career, it made all the difference of the ability to actually go achieve things in later conditions, because I at least was more familiar with it by virtue of stepping into it at a time when it was viewed as either radioactive or not desirable or not career enhancing or whatever else. And it also provides if done right, it gives you a reputation of being willing to step up on behalf of the organization, regardless of what the potential benefit will be to you. And it makes an identification of that, and developing that kind of reputation is invaluable.
Oh my goodness, I'm so glad you mentioned that last part as well, because when you have somebody who can do that, who's willing to do that, and even if they get it wrong, you're as a leader who that person might be directly reporting to, or maybe even you're a couple above, you see that in somebody, and you see the potential, and you think there's somebody that we need to nurture and worship, and we need to keep them.
Absolutely, that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
So it accrues benefit no matter what the outcome is. And giving it your best, every once in a while you hit the home run.
Yeah, and people see it. The people above you see it. A closing question: who has influenced your leadership style, and what about their example stays with you? And that question can be cast broadly. So inside government, outside government, perhaps not government at all. Somebody that you've met, reported to, been mentored by, a broad net. But when you think about broadly, when you think about who has influenced you, who comes to mind?
Well, it's throughout our discussion here, I've mentioned several different leaders I have admired, have been extremely fortunate to have worked for and with during the course of my career. So many others that I could mention as well that have had a very, very important influence in shaping my perspective, as well as providing the guidance necessary to go achieve the things we set out to do. But I would have to say that the number one, hands down, greatest influence during the course of my life was my dad. And he and my mother grew up in New Orleans, within a couple of blocks of each other. And they were the first folks of their family to actually leave New Orleans and go do something else outside of that city. Everybody thought they were crazy, and they were far too adventurous to be trusted with anything. And instead, it was quite the contrary. It was quite the opposite. My dad was, again, engaged as a career naval officer, was part of the original nuclear navy that Admiral Rickover formulated and created in the 1950s and 60s. And it took some risks that were considered to be way outside the zone of what you should be involved in, but they were calculated risks. He was an engineer, so everything was a calculated risk. I think I was probably 25 before I realized the answer was not to be found for everything in a slide rule, but that was his bent and his mindset. And he taught me how to think critically. And it really was one of the most extraordinary attributes. And he was an inspiring parent and mentor in so many ways. And all the different things I've done throughout the course of his life, I had the opportunity through much of it to be able to consult with him on a variety of things, and always walked away with a more informed perspective. Dad was an extraordinary public servant in his own right.
Well, Sean, thank you very much for sharing your insights and experiences. It has been a pleasure talking.
I'm delighted to be with you, Shane. Thank you so much for doing this.
And this is Shane Canfield, CEO of WAEPA, reminding you to empower your team and embrace challenges. Until the next time on Lessons in Leadership.
Find the full podcast and future episodes of Lessons in Leadership on the Federal News Network app and anywhere you enjoy your podcasts.